Artlist.io. Music licensing reimagined. 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 Artlist.io. Music licensing reimagined.
All right, welcome. Let's get started. Hopefully you caught the beginner's guide yesterday, which was a solo cast. Brought in some power minds in the game to maybe get any tips and tricks from them or things that I maybe have missed. I'm personally doubting any of these guys have watched it, but they certainly know the stuff. They've lived the stuff. So without further ado, do we invite people up based on leaderboard earnings? If so, we have to go with Bye Bye Birdie Stables first.
Hey,
Mr. B, what is good?
I tell you, I was away on one of my rare vacations, and all hell broke loose. So I'm trying to catch up with what's going on, but I can't even keep up with the sales marketplace and everything else. It's just insanity. So we've been hoping for a long time we'd get this kind of action, and
I don't think we were thinking this kind of action this early either. So it's
nice. This is great. So I'm back, and I'm just kind of still out of sorts. I still am like on European time, so I've been waking up today I managed to sleep until 5, but every other day this week it's between 2 and like 4. So I kind of start dragging.
I don't know what you do then. You can't even race then. It's too early for all the races.
Yeah, so I'm turning in. I'm already an old man. I'm turning into an even older man. So.
All right. We'll get Sowers up here. I don't know if he's next on the leaderboard. That was just a cheap shot at Bye Bye Birdie. I take those when I can get it. Welcome, Sowers. First time you and I have streamed together. First time I've seen you on stream without the sunshades on, so I like the look.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Welcome back to America, Mr. Big. I've been waking up at 5 also, but I think it's just because I feel like I'm going to miss a deal in the marketplace, and I wake up wondering what crown price is. So it's kind of like a year and a half ago, all over again.
Yeah, you seem to be living on that the marketplace. Every time I'm looking, you're buying something, you're selling something, you're enjoying it.
Yeah, I think it's kind of something we'll talk about a lot today, but I've been doing it now since basically January. If you really want to compete, you got to put the time in. You got to at least analyze and know what good value or good horses are that can't compete on the track. So yeah, hi Spence. Good luck to your LSU Tigers.
Cautiously optimistic. It looks like he maybe had pulled over the side of the road, so we'll get Pocono up as quick as we can for as long as we've got him.
Eddie seems to have won 25 races in a row. He's just dominating everywhere. So, Eddie, you're just kicking ass everywhere. Congratulations.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
We can, yeah. It's a little choppy, but
hey
we
guys.
can hear you just fine.
How's everyone doing, man? Yeah, it's been, like I said earlier, man, I've been feeling it. I'm still feeling it in my ass from what you guys did to me those first 2 seasons, man. But it feels good. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah,
it feels good.
Payback's a bitch or something like that. So. Next up, we've got Vijay from RVA Racing. He goes by Vijay in the Web3 world, and he's still married to tell about it. What's up, Vijay?
What's going on? Yes, solo this weekend, bachelor this weekend.
What's up,
out of
BJJ?
town, so we're just racing some horses, watching some football. It's a good weekend.
Were there any
Sowers
surprises yesterday? How big of an underdog was Colorado in that football game? Does anybody know?
21 and a half.
Yeah.
Jesus. I didn't think it was that bad.
First quarter, I knew it was going to be a real game. And it was awesome to see them get behind, overcome adversity, come back, and that quarterback, that whole team, it's tough to root against them, to be honest. You can agree with Deion's tactics or not, but it's exciting to watch for sure.
It was 110 degrees on that field, and he played 130 snaps. That's just insane. At a high level the whole game. Pretty crazy.
That's Deion Sanders' kid too, right? The quarterback?
Yeah.
Are you talking
right?
The 2A kid.
Oh, Hunter, the guy that was
two-way
the
kid
number
played
1 overall
100%.
recruit.
Yeah, stole him from Florida State.
I think there was some money involved in that, so I don't even know if it counts as stealing at that point. I think they just bought him from Florida State.
It's legal now.
Are you saying there was a backdoor deal?
Not like a PFL backdoor deal, but there was something that changed hands there. So, All right, I will bring up my screen mostly because I just like to see my face a little bit smaller. Like I said, I streamed yesterday. I thought it was a decent job, as quick as someone can, covering 100 minutes of how to start if you're brand new. And I want to kind of pick these guys' brains on things that maybe I missed or things they would do differently, and then really fill in the gaps that I missed. So if you did listen yesterday, we were talking about the race schedule kind of towards the end of the stream, and I missed, which is probably the most critical race type, which is claimers. I touched on it earlier in the stream, but didn't come back to how claimers work, what considerations need to be made when you're racing a claimer. So for those that are new and don't know in real life horse racing, one, in real life, claiming races make up the majority of the schedule at a lot of racetracks around the country. Canterbury Park is just down the road from me. It's more than half of their racing schedule. So claiming races as they stand do not assign any weight regardless of the race. They have a few different formats where we have a juvenile maiden claiming. You can see there, I'll make this a little bit bigger again. I don't know why it doesn't stick every time I do it, but now it's really big. So juvenile maiden claiming would, maiden, if you played the other game, would essentially kind of be a griffin, but you can run a maiden until you win would be the difference there. Juvenile means 2-year-old season. We talked a lot about that yesterday, but then also claiming. So horses that would be able to run here are horses that have not won a race, that are subjecting themselves to be claimed for 5,000 Derby, and are 2 years old at this time. So looks like there's only 13 minutes for this race to get 4 entrants. There's a reasonable chance that it doesn't run. Like we talked about yesterday, if you don't get at least 4 out of 12, the race cancels. You're refunded your entry fee if you were registered for that race. And also touched on yesterday that the less the number of entrants in a race, the higher the crown gift. So this one that's about to close here shows that it's going to award 15.58 crown. There's 4 out of 12 in there. We'll pull it up in a different tab when the entries close in 20 seconds, and I'll show you that as long as someone doesn't snipe my content here, if this stays at 4 out of 12, this crown gift will triple to about 46 if my math is right. Better math than yesterday, at least. But the number you see in the subject line of the race is the claim amount. As of now, the claim amount is the same for fillies and colts. And if you believe that fillies are a more valuable asset, like most people do, they typically don't get a lot of run in these claimers, because for a filly to have win equity in a claimer against a similar colt, it's probably just a much more valuable asset. So that is something that I want to get into before we really showcase the rest on the claimers. Is how do you guys feel about claimers, the volume of claimers we have? Maybe
we need more claimers, but one of the things I've been doing, especially with new people, is telling them, try to get it as cheap as possible. Find the claimers. Obviously, there's a 10K one here. Even if you're not looking actively to buy horses, I think just watching the races can give you as much glimpse of the race math as possible, because you see such diverse fields. So you see horses that have a lot of stars but low grade. You see higher grades with not a lot of stars. So you see how those interactions occur, and that's kind of one of the reasons I try to tell people to watch claimers as a cheap entry, but also just to kind of learn the racing.
Yeah, I'll go 2 things on that. One, if you're just starting out and you want to learn claimers, don't necessarily enter your horses in the claimers right away until you get a good sense of what the right price is. So I would probably watch some claimers for that archetype. So let's say you have RDF horse. Just look at some of the claimers to see, let's say you have an A horse and you're in a certain level claimer, you just watch the races to just get a general sense of the level that's there. You don't want to enter necessarily, an S horse in a $10,000 claimer because you didn't really understand the value. So one thing to do is to, I think Stens can show how to search in the race history. You could do the quick filter. You could do it by claimers, and then you could go back and look and just see the level of horses that are running in those races, so you get a good feel for that. That's number one. Number two, Sten's touched on this. Don't run a filly in a claimer unless you really want to get rid of the horse. You might make a mistake, and just if you're in a rush or whatever and say, oh, I'm going to enter this horse in this race. It makes no sense to enter a filly in a claimer the way things are now. If you're running it at the right, if you're running in let's say it's a 25K claimer, if it's running against colts that are 25K, then it's not going to be as good, because a identical ticket, if one's a colt and one's a filly, the filly's probably worth 50K and the colt's worth 25. So you're not going to run your filly in there. It's just a mistake, and just be very careful when you enter the race. It does give you a warning, but do like a double check and make sure you're not running a filly in it. You'd only really run a filly in a claimer is if you want to sell the horse, and you're not going to win that race, but you can run it and say, okay, I want to sell it for 25K. So you enter it in a 25K claimer. But otherwise, be very careful about making that mistake. And people have done it. You're in a rush. You're not paying attention. You enter a filly in a claimer. You think you were entering, for a colt, and you're going to lose that. So I don't know if Stens had explained this. I guess not. But in a claimer, anyone can buy the horse that's in the race. It's a great evening out. You don't need the team to kind of figure out, okay, this level horse is running here. The market takes care of it. So if you're willing to run your horse and have someone buy it for 25,000 Derby, then you can run in a 25,000 Derby claimer. So over time, that will kind of even out and makes, the people decide like what they think the horse is worth, and they'll run the horses accordingly. If more than one person wants to make a claim in a horse, after the race is over, I think the technical term in horse racing is like shake, because they probably was a like a container where they put slips of paper in and they shake it and they pull out the winning owner. So if, let's say, 5 people try to claim your horse, after the race is over, one of the 5 will get the horse. The horse is sold. You get to keep the purse for that race, but you no longer own the horse. So you kind of, if you're super attached to a horse and you don't want to lose it, don't run it in the claimer either. But over time, I think it actually just makes the job of PFL third time easier. They don't have to worry about various conditions and this and that, and that's a separate aspect of putting together a condition book. But the claimers kind of take care of themselves if you have enough of them out there, because the people that own the horses decide what they're willing to sell the horse for. So if I have a horse that I think is worth 100,000 Derby, I'm not really going to enter it in a 25K claimer, right? So if we each have horses that we think are worth 25K, we're going to enter them, and it kind of makes for a more balanced and even field. Though, sometimes if people want to get rid of a horse, they put it in a claimer. You collect your purse and you're done with it. So maybe you think it's a $35,000, a 35,000 Derby horse, and you run it in a 25,000 one. You try to win the race, you collect your 25 if someone claims it, and then you move on. Anyway, sorry to turn this into my own one-man thing, so I'll stop from there.
I got 2 things real quick that I don't think anyone said during that. Was the best thing about claimers, in my opinion, to learn this game is you can understand the impact of preferences and grade. Especially if you look at the 6-year-olds that are still racing, because those came from tickets. They have a very tight stat allocation due to them matching the grade that's on the ticket. You can see an A horse beat an S- horse if it's racing at the right distance, even if they have the same preferences, and then vice versa. If you're running a dirt horse on turf, you can see all that, because people are doing that in claimers, trying to steal wins, putting a different grade horse, things like that in there. So if you go back and you can look at history, like Mr. V said, if you look at old races, look for the non-juvenile races claiming, and you can kind of really start to see the impact that distance preference has, preferences, those type of things, and how people are racing in those. And it really can help you learn. I think Mr. V and I talked at the very beginning when we started to to race some of these, and that's when we kind of figured out how strong distance preference really was. A's can beat A pluses that have the same preferences, things like that, because just the way the horse likes to run. So that would be my biggest takeaway from claimers. And then the other impact would just be it's a cost-effective way to get a horse and then run it in the exact same one. If after you've done, like Mr. B said, learn what horses are worth what, you can run it, lose it. You bought it for 10K, you ran it, you lost it for 10K. You got to learn the game for a relatively cheap price.
And I hear some DMs in the background. What type of penalty are we getting for that one today, Spence?
Probably a 10K Derby donation to an actual in real life equine charity.
There we go.
No, I think that was a good point there, JJ. Of it's probably the best vantage point to see race math in action, because you are getting horses of different grades, of different total preferences, of different archetypes racing against each other. Sometimes it's a little bit farming just to get the crown, but in some cases people are willing to take a chance off preference in what looks like a good field. If you race an A plus restricted race or an A restricted race, you're seeing the best horses in that archetype A graded. I mean, if there's an A minus in the A graded one, they're making a mistake. So if you want to see, to your point, how the math works, that's probably the best chance to do it. Is anybody always reviewing claimers with the intent of potentially buying a horse? Do you just thumb through and do the expand all to make sure there's not a filly in the races? I mean, we all have a lot of horses, so.
Some days, I claimed one yesterday, just clicking through. I would say the best way to do it is just in Discord. They have the claim bot. As soon as the claiming race opens up, you can click on it, takes you straight to the race, and you won't miss any. You don't have to scroll through the picks open to figure out which ones are claimers. Go straight through the Discord, click that button, and you can, there's an expand all button. You can search for fillies. You know what price point you're looking at. Like if you have $100 to spend, go to the 10K claimers. That's the best way to do it and not have to spend a lot of time reviewing them.
Do you have any advice for anybody that's not in the Discord on how they would best review claiming races?
You would just have to then go to the pick selection open. I would say join it. The link is on the site. Don't click bad links, but if you're on the PFL site, there is a join Discord button on the left-hand side. If you join there, there's a bot that anytime one opens up, whether it's 1 hour before where most of them will be, but if it feels early, it can be as many as 24 hours before for the picks to be able to be made, or the claims.
So we talked a little bit about preferences there, and mainly your points with JJ. But I think something that I wanted to go over today was preferences after Gen Zero. So you touched on, we're seeing different assets combined in a race to try to figure out what's more important than other things. And you started that by saying kind of all the LDF horses have the same distance preference based on the ticket. Now there's radials in there. So even if all the tickets look the same, you have a horse that may excel at 8 furlongs and one that might excel at 6 furlongs, because the 6 furlong might just have a slightly higher start, even though the start grade of an A plus horse was A plus or S minus, whatever that ends up being. Mm-hmm. But we're certainly seeing in the last week, for sure, a lot of horse sales of all buyers. I'm not just talking about 360 Win, which we're all appreciative of. And I do think that that's been great that he's kind of spread the wealth, and a lot of stables have gotten involved in the selling there. I could tell Doughboy was in the chat, and he doesn't even own the horse. It's not his horse. But he sold one for $450K Derby, and you could just tell he was pumped. So that's awesome to see everybody getting involved in it, not just me, not just Mr. B, not just Pocono or Sours. You haven't sold, or you sold one way early to him before we knew what was going on, right, for JJ?
You're talking about the 360 Win guy?
Yeah.
I have not gotten that stimulus yet. Okay. I sold a bunch of horses early, unfortunately. But I still got 100 of them left, so we'll be all right.
All right. But I started that by saying, the Gen Zeros seem to have a similar distance profile, but the other thing they also all had in common was if you had total preferences of 8 or 9 total preferences, chances are you had really good stats. So we consider tickets, and again, this conversation gets less relevant by the day, but the maximum total boost you could have had for a horse was 26 total boosts. That means you had 9 of 9 preferences and you had 3s across the board. So 3 start, 3 speed, 3 stamina, 3 finish, 3 heart, 3 temper.
Actually, you'd have 1 with 2, but that's just math.
Okay. Math is hard. Go ahead, Eddie. Oh, a little choppy. So you had 26 total boosts in each of these archetypes, each of the grades in a lot of cases. And it had great preferences and it had great stats. And what you're not being able to separate from one another is that horse dominating because it has great preferences? Is it dominating because it has great stats? Is it a combination of the both of them? What's more important than the other, preferences or stats? And I think most people in the community seem to think that distance preference is probably more important than preferences, whether that's left, right, dirt firm, soft, firm, dirt, turf. But now that we've flipped the calendar and we have crop 1 horses that are 2-year-olds from 2 Gen 0 tickets that, again, either had really great stats and really great preferences, or mediocre stats and mediocre preferences, or really bad stats and really bad preferences. So we're seeing a lot of people breed, I'll say, A- 9 of 9 preference horses. So that was probably an A- 25 total boost or 26 total boost. And they're breeding that with a really nice S- with 8 or more total preferences. Maybe the foal becomes A+ in that case. Could be an A, could even be an S-, I suppose. And those horses are selling similar to how the Gen 0 horses sold. So an A- 26 would fetch more than an A- 20 in almost all cases. But what we don't know now, and what worries me a little bit about some of the sales we're seeing, is if you take that A- and you bred with an S-, even if you have great preferences, if that resulting foal is an S- for sure, probably, or an A+, again, we talked a little bit about it yesterday, that the base case assumption is there's a lot of averaging going on, averaging the stat grades, averaging the preferences, averaging the global grade. So if an A+ in that scenario, for sure an S- would be an above average global grade outcome. So the concern is, yes, it has the preferences, which with Gen 0, if you had the preferences, you also had the stats. For this crop 1, crop 2, crop 3, we don't know that the resulting horse has the stats. We know they have the preferences. We won't see the stats until that horse retires. So how are you navigating that, Mr. B? And are you buying those horses? Are you selling those horses because you don't want to take a chance? Or
I'm not as worried about that as you are. I know you're, which makes logical sense. You're saying if you have an S- horse, let's say even S- stud, it breeds with an A- filly, and you come up with an A+ foal, as opposed to an S- breeding with an A or an A+ foal, A+ filly, and coming up with an A+ foal. All things being equal, your argument's going to be, I'd rather have the one that came from the higher mare, the higher ranking mare. Because we don't know exactly where within the A+ range this resulting foal came from, but statistically, you would expect the one that came from the A+ mare to be a better horse, ignoring preferences, than the one that came from the A, and then the one that came from the A-. So that's an interesting thing. I guess it depends. If you're getting a filly, I don't know that it matters as much to me, because the preferences matter, and honestly, I don't know how much I care about the fillies, because I'm probably going to be breeding them up more. It's more important to me as a breeding piece and as a racing piece. So the trade-off usually, though, is if you have a lower ranked mare that was bred to create that, is you might have more preferences. So the real interesting question is, would you rather have, let's say they're the same grade, They're both A plus. One came from an A minus and one came from an A. But the one that came from the A minus, let's say, has 8 total preferences in terms of RTF, and the one that came from the A has only 7 or 6.5. That's an interesting trade-off in terms of which is either a better racer or which is a better breeding piece. So I'm kind of agnostic on it. I mean, I don't really know. I guess right now the meta is people want the stars. They want the higher preferences. That seems to be what's out there in the marketplace. But it's really just people kind of guessing at what's going to be there. So you could get, 2 similar fillies, and if one has 6 preference stars and the other one has 8, the one that has 8 might go for almost twice as much as the one with 6. So yeah, I wish I could tell you here's what you should do, but it's really a gamble, and we don't really know because they're just started racing, right? The 2-year-olds have been racing for a week, and I don't know that we have a strong kind of answer to that, and we might not know until they retire and we kind of take a look at how the attributes kind of shake out.
Yeah, I was gonna hop in kind of right there, based on what you said. I mean, I've been tracking. I have a lot of S minuses, right, and that are high preference, and I think there's gonna be some there's not a catch-all answer for this. I think YSM has a Eclipse full that was dropped down to S minus, but it was with an S mare. And it's going to be able to beat S's because and it might be because of those preferences, but I think it's just a good spot to throw in the reminder that the overall grade is not the end-all, be-all once we start breeding these horses. It was very important in the Gen Zeros. These Gen 1s, it's really about the mix of what you got. You can clearly have ups and downs that net you back down to a grade, but it performs higher or lower than that grade depending on what distance you're at. So I'm not as worried about a horse that's, say, an A and an S minus that comes out in S minus, because it obviously did something to become an S minus, right? So as long as those hit in the right spots, having the preferences to me is still important. It's only going to get harder, I feel like, to get them the higher up grades we go, because you're going to have to cross preferences and things like that to get the grade up. So I don't know. I'm on board with not falling in love with the overall grade, but you just got to race them and figure out what you got. And you can probably get some horses for cheaper if they're losing, just because people think that they're racing them right when they're not, things like that, based on all those things. So that's kind of my point.
Anything for you on that, Sowers? I know in your case, you have the most dominant RDS colt in the game, but with that, it still doesn't have insane preferences. So you've used it a lot internally, which makes perfect sense. I think everybody on the stage would do the same if they were in your shoes. But you're maybe missing out on some of the madness of 8 and 9 star sales. How do you feel about it?
Honestly, the lower half, I pretty much months ago just stacked 9 pref, the type of max you talked about at the A levels and stuff. So I know kind of quite a bit about just these horses. The thing that I would like to touch on is the S minus specifically has such a wide range.
Yes.
When I'm looking to buy, I'm still looking at the 2 S minus horses that created that S minus. To me, so far, seem pretty dominant on the track, especially against your A's or A minuses that might have hit Sean or other S minus 9 stars. They're still having a little bit less horsepower, but I just think with blood and everything, it's going to come into play longer term. But obviously, if you can bring as many preferences to the top with strong horses, that's how you're going to be able to kind of conquer long term. So I think that's the right play by people to understand that preferences matter a lot. But I just hate how it's always one or the other. To me, it's everything matters. So whenever your baseline for starting S minus your lowest stat might be A plus, you're obviously going to have a higher baseline S minus horse than if you bred an S minus with say an A9 preference. And so I think that all of that's going to be discovered on the track over the next few months, and then obviously how bloodlines get brought up and stuff as well. So to me, it's like nothing matters more than the other. It's kind of like stats versus temper. It's like you want to maximize as much as you can get. So sometimes if I have to lose some preferences to get a better style or better horse that matches with my horse, I'm willing to do it. Like, I think that you can kind of go both ways on the actual argument. And it's a lot about just how, I just think the overall horse rolls for the A's are going to be tougher than the S minus breeding together. And I think the market is actually valuing like the two S's appropriate compared to the rest of them, even though they are a little gung-ho on preferences.
No, I think that makes sense. The one thing I would shout out, and again, I'd love for him to join the stream sometime and maybe even show his face, the ghost character from Golden Stables. He has a pretty strong stance on this that is opposite of my own, and that's why I like talking with him, because we almost disagree more than we agree, but I think it makes each of us a little bit better to understand the argument. So when we talked about that example of an A minus breeding with an S minus and making an S minus, here's kind of that opposite. It's two S minuses that were really strong S minuses, also staying an S minus. And I have always been of the belief that this is probably more the horse for me than the one that's the A minus that makes an S minus. But to Ghost's point, we know by looking at the breeding reports that a horse that is an A minus breeding with an S minus, if that were to make an S minus, it clearly hit some wicks on individual stack rates. And if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, check the stream out from yesterday. We actually showcased some breeding reports that would kind of underscore that. But to Ghost's point, if it is so far out kicking its coverage from what would be a median or average outcome, then it probably has a couple gaudy stats. And if we think distance preference is very important, if you can have an asset that has some gaudy stats that kind of changes the mold, like we talked about, a lot of the LDF pieces prefer to sprint. They have really good start. They have really good speed. They don't have much in the way of stamina. So if that A minus with the S minus made an S minus, now we don't know, did it make an S minus because it got really great stamina? Did it make an S minus because it got really great start? To me, it really doesn't matter because it did something exceptionally well. And maybe you can pull in a stat that's very useful for everybody else. In the case where it did get, let's say, stamina or finish at LDF, all of a sudden that's a very valuable piece to everybody, because people that are racing LDF, if they have eyes on the Kentucky Derby, are probably going to need to find a way to bring stamina and finish into LDF. And that analogy is specific to LDF, but it kind of exists in other areas as well. It's pretty close to that for RDF. Some of the other ones, it's almost the opposite of LTS. So I think that's an interesting counterpoint, and to basically say, I just don't think we can assume we know anything at this point. So talking to as many people and getting as many differing opinions as you can is going to be helpful.
And I think the horse that you're specifically talking about, although it can be a little tough to figure out what it wicked on, you can usually tell by the report, or you can kind of look at the highest ceiling of both of the parents. And if they both have a ceiling stat compared to their ticket grade, then that's the first place I would check to see that distance. So for example, you're talking stamina finish, and I think that, all right, I made S minus, I must have rolled up on something. Well, the dad has an outlier stat in that area. Let me go to 10, 11, 12, test there with that horse, because the ones you're talking about, some of them, they've got wicks across the board, and you might not know which one it wicked on. So you got to make an educated guess to check out your horse first at those distances. If it doesn't go there well over a few races, maybe try a different spot, short, medium, whichever, to kind of explore which of the ceiling stats you might have hit.
Yeah, I would agree there with Sowers. Like I think with Gen 0, you very could quickly dial in where your distance was. With these Gen 1s, I personally am racing them at all kind of 3 levels. in their first couple races and just comparing, because I actually am opposite. I think so. Like this breeding report of Diana Mercury, the one on the left. So a lot of people think, oh, if it went up, it's because Finnish wicked because it has the largest wick. I actually think it would be speed, because you're thinking that, you know, start, stand, finish. Like if you hit the medium and those gray boxes there, you're like already almost an S. But if speed is the one that wick, that's what's going to pull you all the way up. So I think I'm in the opposite camp of most people. If I look at breeding report and I actually go up higher grade than I thought I was going to, I am basically thinking it's the lowest one that rolled better than its average, because it's not, you're not just like guaranteed to get that 100 percentile, but like if you hit the 75 percentile on speed there, now you have an S that you wouldn't have if it hit the bottom half of that 50 percentile.
Yeah, my question is always, how does that balance equal the grade on the horse? Because we saw even, I don't think it was Blood Moon, but another one of Pocono's horses has 4 S stats, has an S minus. And so, like, what is the actual accumulation there to get the ticket grade? I think that's something that even me, I've been in this game since last December really heavily. I still fail to grasp that total concept. And I think a new person is definitely going to fail to grasp that.
Yeah, I don't know. I went back and looked at some. Go ahead, Sin. Sorry.
I was going to say, we should all hire an HRM guy to elevate our stables, because if anybody's going to know, they probably actually are best positioned to know. I know offhand, I know one example of a horse, and I've inbred intentionally in a few cases already in live. When I inbred in Beta V2, we had I think it was an S horse or maybe an S minus horse that got SS speed. And I 100% attribute it getting SS speed to inbreeding making wonky stats. And that's kind of why I'm willing to try it again. But if you tell me you have SS speed, not just S plus speed or not just SS minus speed, but kind of 3 subgrades up on one stat, but the global grade stays down, I think that puts me in a position to kind of agree with JJ in that I think you do have to have your lowest stat or your lowest 2 stats can't bring down your entire horse, or they do bring down your entire horse overall grade. So one outlier stat is not going to carry you to a higher subgrade, in my opinion.
Yeah. I was going to say something before with to Sours. I don't remember what it was, but if I think of it, I'll hop back in.
Here's a good reference. You could pull up Dr. Sturdy Trail Stakes, and A minus just be the S minus I tried to run opposite direction on dirt, which I bought from GPG 2 days ago. But it's
just happened?
Yeah, Dr. Sturdy Trail Stakes V1, and basically since it turned yielding, the A minus gets quite a bit more stars. I'm pretty sure that this horse is a short horse anyway, mine. So you can kind of dig into the distance preference of the A minus and see. But this is stuff that we're going to start to see more on the regular that we didn't really see with Gen Zero, is fillies having different grades, but being able to beat a wider range, especially a wider range up. Did you find it? Yeah.
Yeah. I guess if I'm honest, I would really be curious of Mr. B's thoughts on this. I'm not even evaluating crop 1 race results yet. Like, would I like my horses to win? Yes.
We don't even know
if they lose, like I talked about it a little bit last night. If these horses are aging progressively, like on a daily basis or at least a weekly basis, it's not you flip a season and you're a year older. It's the next day you're a day older. So if a horse is only 7 days into the season, it's about as immature as that horse is going to be, which probably means it's going to have the highest variance of its entire lifetime in most cases. Like, there's different aging curves and peaks can be longer. You can reach a peak earlier or later. But I think this first week of racing, I would be really hard pressed to put a lot of weight on the results we're seeing. And I know we lost Eddie. Shout out to Pocono Racing in the Pocono Mountains, apparently. We'll maybe get him back eventually. But he sold a horse, an S horse, that won it was like a 12 furlong race, and it beat second place by like 2.5 seconds, which again, 12 furlongs is probably going to lend itself to have the largest margin of victory. But like last place was like 6 seconds back, and they were all S horses. Like it was really just a dominant performance. And he had asked about selling it. And there's different considerations to be made when selling a horse. We talked about it a little bit last night, is how many one-of-ones are in the horse that you have. In this case, it had 2, and it was a colt. So it's from a breeding standpoint, it was probably going to be a little bit challenged on the breeding side. And with a dominant performance like that, one, is it just a super horse? But if it was a super horse, why wouldn't it be an S plus? So maybe it has really good stamina, really good finish, but it has bad start or something like that. So it makes it a super marathon horse. But at the end of the day, I guess my advice to him was maybe this horse just peaks way earlier than any other horse that we're seeing out there. And at that point, does it become less valuable as other horses potentially catch up to it in age? Again, complete speculation, but that was kind of the advice I'd given him.
Yeah, I think to tie into what you said, I've been helping a lot of new people, and one of the things I keep telling them is like, when you bang 2 one-of-ones together, even if you get that godly lick, you might be canceling out half of the people that would pay you to breed that horse. So there are some considerations to be made. Like, of course, the 2 S one-of-ones are going to make a great horse, but when we're talking breeding value stuff, you might be better off taking 2 unique bloods, hitting them against each other, and trying to create an S, trying to create some stat with those, because if you have unique blood, you're going to open your future clients who can breed with you to pretty much everyone. And so whenever I start to think about the higher levels, especially because I have some one-on-ones, I have some S minus uniques. Obviously, I have Doc, who's one of the most unique horses as far as having siblings. All of these things are going to come into play, and you just need to be cognizant of, all right, how much can that horse make racing? Because if it's a colt, it's probably going to be more racing or in-house breed if you have multiple one-of-ones. And just kind of think about 3-4 generations down the line, what could make your horse profitable if it's a colt, or will it just be a racer basically based on, and I can't wait till we start getting the Gen 1 bloodlines and start figuring out how many siblings are there, because soon it'll pass one-of-ones. Some horses like Shawnee Bear, or for sure the A+9 preferences, are going to have so many more siblings out there that if you can create the bloodline that all of those siblings have to go to, you're going to create a very good revenue source per month, at least for 3 to 4 months, to give all those horses that we know are brothers and sisters an alternate path kind of to the top. And so that's kind of my strategy and what I'm.
I think that makes sense. The next thing I had on the agenda, and I wanted to be respectful of Mr. B, when he's not on vacation, he's going to concerts. So I don't know how much time he's got left for us today, but I did want to get into the Archetypes for Noobs section of the agenda, and that this is one area I didn't cover last night. So I do want this to be more of a PFL 101 section of just helping people understand the differences between the archetypes, maybe what distance each archetype is predisposed to like, how many one-of-ones are at each archetype, how many really unique S- colts are at each archetype, who are the big players at each archetype, are there any other considerations outside of that? I had Mr. B and the JJ slated to do either RTS or RTF or both. I don't know if one of you wants to take one over the other or to work together on it.
Yeah, I don't have
I
a
got no
preference.
preference. Fine.
Yeah, we could do
Go
it
ahead,
together.
Mr. B. You start.
Well, yeah, I mean, RTF is a much more populated archetype than RTS. And it's less dominated by the one-of-ones than RTS. So RTF basically has 9922 and 9923.
Which is Astro and Scuba, both rank 1 if you go to the Bloodline tab.
Right. And there aren't even a lot of them. So there's only maybe 5 cults, I think, that are 5 or 6 that are there if you look in the breeding barn, right? So Flushing Meadows, Big A, Jupiter, Durban Poison, Indian Wells, and maybe there's one I'm forgetting. But
Skittles or whatever.
oh yeah,
it's
no,
awesome. But
yeah, he's
But that's
not,
a unique one.
that's not a 101 though.
oh yeah. All right, yeah.
So, but there are a ton, well, not a ton, but there's a fair amount of non-one of one kind of S- and A+ horses in this. So it's a very interesting archetype, and there's a ton of very high preference fillies. I'm talking Gen Zero here. So there are a lot of options when you're looking to breed. So it's definitely a very abundant abundant options when you're in there. In terms of like preference, they tend to run long, so they have stamina, and they are not necessarily speed horses, though for some reason, even though my ticket for like the one that I had, she's the one, looked like it should be a distance horse. It was actually just a monster sprinter. So, but by and large, if you look at the tickets and you look at the boosts and stuff, they're all going to have like S+ stamina. All the top horses are going to have S+ stamina there. I think it's start and stamina, but definitely stamina. Even ones that were relatively sprinter. So I guess that's the thing, Stens, you were talking about, is in a lot of cases it's relative. So you'd say, well, this is a great sprinter, and it's part of the reason why she's the one was a great RTF sprinter is all the other RTF horses weren't that fast, at a short distance. So it's all relative, and the reason why she's the one might not be a great distance horse. Don't pull up Groot. The reason why she's the one was a great distance horse, wasn't a great distance horse, is maybe your horses, I think, was it Goat and are just
Goat and Diana would have been the top two.
Yeah, a little bit better, so that they'll always beat she's the one there, but the difference might not be that great. But as we get into future generations and we start kind of breeding to bring more speed into RTF, things will change. I don't know how things are with the Generation 1. So far, it looks like she's the one's offspring is probably a sprinter again, but we'll see how that plays out. So anyway, I think if you're in RTF, it's definitely a fun archetype. You're not, so like Sowers has, we talked about Doc. Doc is an incredible horse, but there's really not a lot of depth at RDS. So that if you want like a long-term project to kind of maybe get a great horse that could dominate, RDS is an interesting thing, because RDF is like super stacked, and there's very little at RDS. So that's more of like, if you want to play in that field, you're kind of specializing and you're probably going to work. Whereas RTF, you can kind of have fun right away. So it kind of depends, I think, what your goals are. You can move up relatively quickly. Like I said, some people buy the kind of 9 preference, or 8.5 preference, A- filly. You could breed it with, RVA has Balloon Arch, and then you breed it with a 9 of 9 there. And all of a sudden, now you've moved up to an A. If you're lucky, an A+, and you have like 9 preferences still, and then you can, go to the next generation. But you'd probably have a very good horse running, in this generation. That being said, there's a lot of other horses that are like that, so it's not that simple, because your competition is going to be stiffer. Whereas if you have a monster RDS horse and you're running on a sloppy track, then you're going to have a huge edge. Whereas at RTF, it's just going to be a much more competitive archetype.
Just a quick visual representation of that. So I've got, again, shout out to Gavoni, Gap Data guys. I've got Right Turf Firm, A+ only retired horses pulled up. It's only showing me fillies, so I think it's missing colts somehow. But if you look through, all of these are global grade A+, and the first 20 or so of them all have S or S- start, but they all have A+ or A speed. Most of them have S- stamina. So they really do look a lot like She's the One. She's the One is just an S as opposed to an A+, but they always have their best two stats be start and stamina, which isn't in and of itself great for a specific distance preference. If you wanted a sprinter, you'd probably want start and speed. If you wanted a marathoner, you would want stamina and finish. This has one of each rather than two of one. So that's why I think it's going to be an interesting one to follow, because whoever can actually turn a horse without much speed into getting some speed there probably does become a much better sprinter. And similarly, whoever can add finish to that could probably make a better marathoner than those that exist currently. As far as players in the archetype, I think it is one of the most diversified ones. I don't know if everybody would agree with that statement, but obviously you have a big bag there. We do as well. Wimbledon Turf, which is monkey tennis, is just as big there. Brad, which is Miami Nation, is fairly big there. So there are some big stables, but there are also people that have pieces. Like Sowers has got some pieces there. GVG's got some pieces there. So I think there are other archetypes that are more dominated by one or two or maybe three stables than RTF is, and I think it's interesting from that perspective as well.
Yeah. So then, okay, good. I was going to say, if his audio's up, he can start with RTS, or if he has any extra comments on RTF.
Missed all of that. Not sure. Power went out for like a minute. That sucked. But
just your standard archetype RT speed.
Yeah, RT. I think I don't know. I just real quick. I guess I don't know if it was covered. Sorry if it's duplicated. But I think the best part about RT is what Mr. B said. Very populated at the lower grades with very good horses. I think they'll be able to breed up and compete. You don't have to start at the top there. It has got a good mix of different players there, but I don't think there's a single person who just dominates it or anything like that yet. But RTS has the S+. It's got Churro. Kamish's S+. Walter White was the best Gen 0 racer we saw. Those both share the same sire, 9924, which is the ticket taker stud. It also had Mundo, Gumdrop, Early, I think, are the other three from 9925. And it also has a handful of non-101S fillies, which were very rare to have. Warwick is in JPEG Lord's stable, and then there's a couple other ones. I think Brad has one, and Sleppener Stables, Star Killer, and Discord has a couple. So it's pretty heavy at the top, but there's not a lot of preferences. So unlike RTF, which had a ton of unique stuff at S-, both fillies and colts, max preference, 3-match horses, things like that, that doesn't exist at RTS like at all. There's a 3-match colt. Trotsky out of Grape Syndicate is the best colt at S- there that's unique, but it only has 7 preferences. There's not a 9 preference A+ colt from Gen 0 there. So RTS is really unique in that there's got to be, like, if you're going to get preferences in there, like the max one, again, we don't know how important those are versus stats like we were talking about earlier, they're going to have to come from below. So it's a good spot, I think, to join in at like the S- range right now and just navigate your way up. There's obviously some very big killers at the top, but there was that next tier was definitely missing. Buffy is the only one that did have 9. That's a Brad Miami Nation Right Turf horse as well, but that's a filly. So it has. I don't think it's had any 9 of 9 like crazy S or anything that come out of it yet. But that's definitely the best pieces will probably be coming from Buffy from a filly standpoint. I think he's hit some internal unique stuff as well as Walter White. But yeah, I think that's like kind of the top range. They definitely prefer longer distance. Not many sprinters there. There's not very much speed in right turf at all, both firm or soft. So if you want to go against the grain and not, go for your championships, the 10 furlong races, if you can figure out how to get a sprinter, especially on the slop, I think you could have a good winner there. But there's been a lot of mixing of stats or preferences, sorry, at Right Turf so far. I know, Stens, you've done it 1 month with Walter White. Brad's done it with a lot of his Right Turf firm stuff. Monkey Tennis has done it with his going to Walter White and Mundo and vice versa. So we're going to see a lot of blending. The preferences are going to kind of get zeroed out that first time that they get mixed. I think it's set up to be anyone's game, honestly, on both sides, based on some rolls, some luck, and yeah, we'll see where it goes. Again, like I said, I know Commission's done some churro stuff with Diva. That's been a pretty good horse so far. That's an S plus as a Gen 1 racer. I think its name is Drama. But then that takes the 2 1-of-1 sires out from that. There's Trace Leches, which is a unique colt. So there's options, but nothing's like, it's not like a very linear, this is how you play it at RTS, I don't think. Not sure.
And again, then, yeah, no, I do. And since we showed a graphical representation of RTF, again, keep in mind RTF had start and it had stamina as its best 2 stats. And again, I like to look at this to try to understand the archetypes. I like to look at A plus because that kind of ignores the super unique S minuses, which maybe isn't a good comparison. And it certainly excludes the 1-of-1s, which sometimes bring in different stats to an archetype. Yep. So like I said, RTF was higher in start and higher in stamina. You can see here, like through the first dozen or so, most of them have A plus start and speed, but then get up to S minus stamina and finish. So again, if we're saying stamina and finish are better for longer distance, to me, yeah, these horses would start or struggle to sprint, but they should be better than the RTF counterparts at a longer distance. And we saw
Nico
that play out in live.
Nico is the one 26 boost A plus out of Soul Brigman Stable. It won like 20 times before it retired. The first season you could retire because it had that S minus speed and it just won like every sprint at RTS because nobody else had that role. So that horse has bred some interesting ones so far. But yeah, if you look there, Colts, like I said, the highest is 8 preferences. I have one, I think. Big Brain has one, and I can't remember. Might be Brad as well. So,
question the chat for the secretary of PFL.
Yeah, that was probably Stens. So
I doubt it.
So yeah, there's gaps. I think that's the overarching theme of Right Turf in general is there are gaps to be filled. Whoever wants to target those gaps and get there first is going to have some valuable stuff. Whether that's bringing in unique 1-of-1 blood, whether that's going for sprinters, whether it's getting, I don't know, however crazy you want to get with it. There just were very clear gaps in terms of what all is missing. So yeah, I think it's. I'm having fun playing there. I think it's probably the most represented in terms of like OGs. Like there's just everyone seems to have at least 1 or 2 pieces there.
Well, one thing I'm not sure if Sowers is going next, but this will be I'm gonna have to go, but this will be a good segue, is that our DS is similar in that especially as you get to the top, it's really hard to get the S. Okay, I don't even know what does Doc have 2.5 for the S? So at the top, there's just nothing with the S. So it's going to be
talking condition preference too.
Condition preference. So it's going to be very difficult to get there, and it's very similar at RTS where you just don't have a lot of the soft. Okay, the 1-of-1s pretty much always are going to be, I think they're capped out at 1.5 for that, either 1 or 1.5. So you need the non-1-of-1s to do that, and there just isn't a lot. It's not top heavy, in other words, in terms of the non-1-of-1s. So it's going to be interesting how you get the S preference into that at the top level. and it's going to be very similar at RDS. And I'm sure Sowers maybe has some interesting ideas, because right now the only idea is to hit Doc and hope you get lucky. But then what's your next step? I mean, we're waiting for Knight Saturn to retire. Shout out to Big Brain for winning
13 wins in a row.
Yeah, and
Knight
winning,
Saturn.
finally winning the on preference. Well, not on preference, but at least an RD major last night. And I would have retired that horse a long time ago, but they're believers in the game and they love racing. So
they get paid off for them. They've done really well and they're about to do well. I think they've had a strategy ever since the beginning. They knew that this next window is exactly when all my RDS has to go pay them to breed. Your RDS, like, there's no other ways. And it is a great layup that you just gave me, or a great alley-oop. And I'm about to slam it home because there is a way to get soft into RTS. And I did this past breeding. I decided to go buy a bunch of wombs, RTS wombs, and bang them with Doc. And there's basically two ways. You got to come from A, where there's a lot of 3 S's, and there's some at S minus. But it's the same with all the S or higher grades. You're going to have to either bring the preferences up or from a different category, from a different left or surface, whichever. And so I do think that, like, when you do talk about RDS, you can kind of go both ways here. You can take some of those RTS and come over to RDS, because I think that keeping the soft high, the higher you go, is really what gives RDS an edge. Like, all the first crops I'm going to make from Doc are probably not going to be as strong as RDF, but it's going to take time to use Knight Saturn to get those preferences up so that I can kind of dominate them the way we saw Eclipse dominate LDS. It was very similar. LDS has small population as well. And when you look at RD compared to RTF or RTS, you basically have at the top, really a lot of the horses have 1-on-1 blood. And they're all power horses. Basically, they've got killer stats. Most of them have lower temper. And so you're going to be faced with a lot of decisions of, do you go unique and sacrifice stats now just to have a unique colt or a unique filly in the future? Or do you go, for instance, 99-22 is probably the most fillies. That's the Astro. And that's what Big Nose Kate is. Do you go, to 9923 to get your stamina, to get your speed? It matches perfectly a lot with the tickets. Or do you try to stay unique? In RD, you're basically playing a game that in RTF you don't have to play as a filly. You have to play, all right, well, I hit 23, so now the horse that I'm creating has a Scuba and an Astro Blood. All right, that only leaves me with going to a Ziggy at 9921, the next generation, or you have to come to Doc Holiday, you have to go to Primetime, and Primetime has such a strong preference benefit at the top. If you look at RDF, I think it might be the lowest as far as having 3 firms. There's definitely not a lot of A+. There's really hardly any at S-. GBG has some of the best uniques, Aristotle, and then Paul Bunyan, which does have 2.5 firm. And so I think it kind of goes back to what we talked about to begin with. It's like, if you're gonna go up, bring your stats with you. If you don't have a lot of stats, maybe it's better to breed 1 step higher to kind of get the grade. I don't really know if RDF is going to be as wide open as RTF. It seems a lot more condensed as far as blood. And in that ways, making a unique colt in RDF could be a lot more valuable than, say, RTF, because RTF, it seems like there's just so many avenues you can go. As a new person, you're not really constricted to having to worry about 3-4 bloodlines away. And so RDF also has an assortment of speed, stamina. It's got it all. So if you want sprinters, it's the highest population at the top as well. I think that the biggest difference I see is that in RTF, at least at the A level, the A- level, there's a ton of 9 preferences, where in RDF, even at the A level, there's not. And so That's one of the things I see. I have, maybe 4 or 5 pieces in the mid levels with A. They're all 9 preference. I have been looking for those at RDF for months, and I've never really found those. Some of them are inactive, but most of them just have 8.5 or 8 stats, including your S minus. And so, to get to the top, bringing unique blood to RDF, I think is going to be really valuable and something that I worked on getting a couple wounds, couple purchases, just trying to create S cults that have totally unique blood. Obviously, Doc Holliday and RDS gives me that ability, but when you're taking these cross preferences, and it's something they mentioned earlier about Stins, and I think one of the reasons he went to Walter White is because it gives him the ability to bring speed into RTF. And so the first person that can do that is obviously going to have a leg up on the competition from 6 to 9 furlongs. And then also offer a great breeding option for customers out there. I mean, if you can bring that, and that's one of the reasons I decided to go ahead and start bringing Doc Blood over to RTS, is I realize it's a natural stepping stone. He has low dirt, and if I can keep the soft stars high, and I actually got lucky, I got a 2.5 0, 2.5 RTS S minus that's going to bridge me over there right away. And I just hope that thing has S speed, or even S minus speed is a great low floor at RTS and in general. And so that's where we talked about stats versus preferences. Obviously, I'm losing some preferences to create a different bloodline over there that might not even be that valuable because the unique blood's already abundant. But it could give me that speed stat that could make a good bloodline over there that would get customers and stuff. And that's pretty much just RDF, RDS. It's a lot of headache to try to figure out several generations down the road, especially if you start at the top. If you start at A plus, S minus, you can probably find a lot better competition than what I'm chasing. I'm chasing literally an OG guy who's been in since the beginning, who has 9 preference prime time. And then I was starting to get a good foothold. Then this guy GDG comes in and just literally buys every available horse. And then I tried to beat him on some wounds, and he got the wound the next period. But at least I'm just trying to do as much as I can to kind of chase that guy around. And it's exciting because I know he's a type A competitor just like I am. And I'm not just going to fold and walk away. I'm really going to hope to get lucky, and then also be really unique and understand that I don't have the money that he has. So what are the things I can do? Well, I can try to go unique blood, try to invest a little more now, and maybe create that piece that either he has to come to or all the other people in RDF has to come to. And I think that will generally apply to all the different sectors.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that was a pretty good summation of both of those archetypes. I guess just to underscore what I consider unique pieces at those archetypes, Knight Saturn is the S minus from Big Brain at RDS. He talked about that as by far the best preferences in total, but obviously a subgrade below Doc, which is a very unique piece to be at the S. Again, it only has two stars on the condition of soft, but there's really no other S cult that's close to that.
He's got 2.5. You can't short him that half star.
2.5. And
he's
that's an important
2.5. Yeah, I mean, and I think, when you get 2.5, 3, obviously you're sloppy. You want to try to focus on 80 or 100%. I mean, 80 can go yielding some. This is something you'll learn as you start, that, when you have a lot of stars, you really want to try to put them to work as much as possible.
Did you notice, and I'll maybe give some commentary on RTS versus RTF, but did you happen to notice when you raced Doc against RDF horses, were the RDF horses better or worse? I understand you have the condition that can set yourself apart, and you're saying focus on 80% or 100% to try to get sloppy. But if you got a yielding track, which horses were generally winning?
Doc was dead on yielding. Okay. And I ran him even in the Derby. He was dead there. I think he finished 14 and 20. He was basically dead on yielding because he doesn't have the general outlying stats. His biggest thing is he has S plus temper and S plus stamina. And so if you came 10 to 12 and it was wet, it was either him or Knight Saturn, and even Knight Saturn could poke him early. And then once we got to 11, 12, Doc couldn't be beat as long as it was sloppy. And so, that's just one of the things to think about is that right dirt, the pure speed, the pure stamina, there's so many of them that they would come even on sloppy and beat Doc, a fair percentage of the time where Doc would get second or Doc would get third. But that temper made him to where he was almost always podium in those conditions and most of the time winning at 11 and 12.
Yeah, I didn't bring it up to mock your horse by any means. I think to look at it from a newcomer's perspective, if I say there's 8 archetypes, that doesn't mean you couldn't race RDF at RDS. Correct. Certainly to your point, that was successful in Gen 0. Now, will it be as successful in Crop 1 or Crop 2?
So far,
to be determined.
So far, I think so. And it's just going to take a long time because I'm taking firm horses to soft. So that's going to take several generations. I think people need to understand that when you are cross preferences, a lot of times you might be throwing away a breed. That breed might not perform the way you want, but it could bridge you to something. I remember when I first got in, I was so obsessed. I had to get LTF and RDS. They're the most unique, blah, blah, blah. But honestly, they have some of the smallest pools as far as racing competition. And now that we have crown stimmies, that's really valuable. But back then, only not having any competitors wasn't very valuable. You still want to have a lot of people to race against. And I think that RDS is kind of good if you have an RDF horse that probably has less stars, especially in the firm arena, than your competition. And you might not have the strongest horse as them. So maybe you can get over to RDS in a generation or two down the line. You'll be kind of at the top of the chain instead of the middle or lower end. And that's kind of what I've done with some of my S minuses and even, my S girls, which were pretty good racers themselves.
For sure. And then just to circle back to comparing RTF versus RTS, that one kind of plays out as you'd expected based on when we pull up the A pluses, that RTS didn't have start or speed almost always. So an RTF would probably beat an RTS on a quicker track, for sure if it's firm, probably on yielding, maybe even on soft. And then the opposite tends to be true at longer distances. Now, we talk about Scuba or 9923, Rarity 1, looks like a scuba diver. Scuba in any archetype that it bred in brought in stamina to it. So their stamina or Scuba was part of RTF. So there are a subset of RTF that did perform really well on longer distances, but generally speaking for the archetype, RTS would have been better longer distance, RTF would have been better shorter distance.
Did you notice that the Scubas seem to age a little quicker as far as the Gen 0, at least at RDF, it kind of seemed that way, and I'm not exactly sure, but even my LDF S minus seemed really quick out the gates and really strong. It feels like Scuba at least is like one of the early best bloods to have, the 101s.
I'm not willing to go there myself. I think what we saw in a lot of cases where Scuba provided stamina where stamina didn't exist.
So and that performed at the majors, basically. So that gives the bias.
Well, even like the S minuses. So you have like Frank McClary, right? That's an S minus Scuba. Mm-hmm. So if you're racing S minus restricted races and you're racing 9 furlongs or longer, if all the other horses prefer to run 4 to 6 or 4 to 7, like you're automatically more likely to win that race.
Basically, that makes a lot of sense. And I think like even what you're doing here is what I did with my spreadsheets when I first got in the game. I looked at Gen 0 and I looked at stuff like this. And I just looked at like what makes your horse unique. Looking at all the stats, you'll see some SS, some SS minus. And that's really what we're trying to create when we're breeding. We're really trying to create these things that if you look at it versus their archetype or versus their competition, you can have an outlier so that you will specifically have an area that you dominate. And I think that's what I'm trying to build no matter what my horse is. It might take me a few breeds to get there, or I might be able to do it with one. But these are all the things that you really need to consider in breeding and just competition in general, even choosing races.
100% agree. We will switch over to LDF then on that segue. Again, that started with Scuba brings stamina everywhere. But what you'll see when you go to LDF is stamina is what's lacking. So again, I'm filtered by left dirt firm, looking at A pluses that have retired. It's excluding Colts. I'll have to talk to Gavoni to try to figure out, but I'm not seeing the full population here. But you're seeing enough, and
They're
you
in
can
the
see that.
stud barn is what it is. And I've talked to them. I wish that we could choose multiple of these. It's just a user interface thing that we'll get better at, even with the grades.
No, you can. You can.
Okay.
You can. You just hit
see if you
control.
can do that with grades now. Can you do that with
Yeah, you
grades
can. You
also?
just hit. Yeah, you just hit control.
Oh, no wonder he thought I was a dummy and was wondering that.
Well, apparently I was a dummy as well. So we'll look at this quickly, but you can see, a lot of these have S minus start and speed, and then maybe they have some finish, but almost none of them have stamina. So A plus stamina, A plus. Like if I sorted by stamina to see of the 67, what is the best stamina grade? 0 of the A pluses at LDF have S minus stamina. So that to me means that's where that archetype is deficient in just actual stats. But it is kind of saved by Scuba in that sense that Scuba does have stamina. Scuba is at LDF. There's an S minus 1 or 2 that you have. There's a couple at the S level as well. So when we talk about how do you bring speed and finish maybe to RTF, or how do you bring start and speed to RTS, in some cases those are a little bit harder to do because even within that archetype there really isn't a single piece that has what you're looking for. But at LDF, it is an LDF that is a Scuba horse. So it's not, I'm going to breed LDS with LDF to bring stamina over. It already exists there. Now it only exists in the 101s. Again, Scuba 9923 looks like a scuba diver. We'll show rarity 1 when you go to the bloodline page. But other than that, it is very deficient on stamina. As far as who competes here, are there any unique pieces here? I would say there's probably 1-2 unique pieces here. Pocono Racing Eddie, who was on earlier, he's got Morning Wood, which is not from a 1 of 1, so it's not 9921, which is Ziggy. It's not 9922, which is Astro. It was not 9923, which is Scuba. All 3 of those exist at LDF, but he has like an S17 total boost at LDF that is proving to be a pretty good 4th option. So if you don't want to hit the 3 1 of 1s that exist, you can use that. There's some good S minus pieces, but they still prefer sprint distances in large part. Eddie's got one of those as well. He's got Shawnee Bear. The other ones that come to mind are Persian Bull out of OAB Racing, and then GVG's got 2. He's got Hercules, and I'm going to forget the other one. I don't think he'll be offended. It's pretty similar in profile. So the challenge for LDF is going to be to make stamina and keep stamina, because if you bred with Scuba the first time and you get a filly, then you go to breed that again. If you breed that with Ziggy, which 9921 kind of prefers shorter distances wherever it plays. So are you sacrificing the stamina you just earned by breeding with Scuba the first time? Mm-hmm. So in that respect, I do think we're going to have to get creative at LDF, even though I started that by saying you have to be less creative than the other archetypes. The other unique piece there is Rose of Zion. So it's the only 1 of 1 filly that wasn't used to make an S plus. So if I go to, I guess I can just go to the breeding barn. I know it's fairly recently listed. So every time we talk about checking sires, how many 1 of 1s are in it, make sure you don't inbreed, all those types of conversations, they're almost entirely based on looking at the sires. So the mare, this is the female version of Ziggy, and Rose of Zion is a stud, but let's say it was a filly. If it was a filly, it could breed with a Ziggy stud and it wouldn't be inbreeding, because just because it's a Ziggy mare does not make it an inbreed. It has to be the same exact asset. So this is unique in the sense that everybody that already has a Ziggy filly can use this. It likes start and speed, just like all the other Ziggy assets do, but the stud itself isn't Ziggy. So if you wanted a sprinter at LDF, one, they exist kind of naturally, and two, you can hit Ziggy, and then you can hit Rose of Zion, which is like Ziggy squared or whatever you want to say. As far as big stables that compete here, I mentioned two of Eddie's horses, so it's no surprise that Eddie competes very well at LDF. He's got a couple of S pluses, I believe, already. Balthazar is competing at both LDF and LDS. He's got some of the top colts and some of the top fillies there. The Grape Data guy's got 2 S pluses there already. GVG's got some big pieces there. So Big Brain, I think, has got Swift Sapphire, which is a really nice filly. We have nice pieces there. So that's a long list. And in that sense, I think it's somewhat similar to RTF in that it's balanced and broad. And RDF is kind of balanced and broad as well. I just think how I would compare and contrast RDF to LDF is you have the 2 S26s at RDF that kind of loom over the population. They have 9 preferences when all the other best S's only have 7.5 preferences. So there are no S pluses at LDF. The top horse is an S20, seven total preferences. So it's fairly nice in that respect. Shout out to Blue Elder in the chat. He deserves a shout out for RDF. I think he made 2 S pluses himself and then bought a third. So I love seeing players reinvest in the game, even if they maybe have sold one in between. If we go to Left Dirt Soft, again, so kind of the counterpart to Left Dirt Firm, it's kind of a lot of the opposite. I'll go to A plus. And we'll do retired and it's done. 40 there, sort by condition. So if you do LDS, again, this is A plus. So typically if you're a strong A plus, your best stat grades are S minuses or S's. So where LDF had its best stats or attributes in start and speed, it's the opposite for LDS. The best attributes are in finish and heart. It does kind of notably struggle in stamina itself. Again, stamina and finish are your 2 longer distance stats. Finish seems to be very strong right now, that it can kind of overcome a relatively low stamina. To be determined how that plays out longer term. But you're seeing a lot of these. I mean, there's a few with S minus start, but these are the best pieces too. Basically, all of them have a strong grade in finish, and a lot of them have a strong grade in heart. From a stable composition or unique pieces, I think the most unique piece is Eclipse, that is owned by YSM Racing. They have several other fairly unique pieces there. And that would be kind of a natural segue to when we talk about what stables compete where, how balanced it is. I would love to chat with Peep sometime, or I know SoCal was maybe going to join later. In my opinion, LDS does seem pretty tightly held. YSM has a pretty firm grip on the archetype as a whole. Distables is a very large stable, and their primary focus is also LDS. And then you've got Balthazar, like I said before, he competes at LDF and LDS. So outside of those 3, I know Big Brain's got some stuff.
You got Elvis, Soulmate.
But that's kind of a 1 horse and it's 1 colt, right? I don't know what Soulmates has.
Does he not have a lot of fillies? I don't know.
I don't know either, to be honest with you. I guess I can look.
The thing that I saw when I first got into LDS is just how few horses there were in Gen Zero. I mean, you've only got 15 horses total on the page for SLDS as Generation Zero. And then S minus, you got like 45. And I know RTF is kind of small too, but you saw it a lot with early liquidity issues. I mean, there's only 6 fillies SLDS that are going to continue. So you definitely have a lot of room to breed up to that, whether you come from LDF or below it.
So to answer RVA's question on what Soulmates has for LDS, he's got one, and because it's got 2 stars and soft, I know it's not from a 1 of 1, so that's a pretty good piece. But then it drops off pretty quickly there, so it would be tough for me to imagine that Elvis alone is going to carry him to the top there. And I mean, Soulmates is about as active as a buyer on the marketplace, so maybe he'll buy some fillies to better use Elvis in house. So we don't know that for sure yet. The only other archetypes we had before we can change the conversation a little bit is LTF and LTS. And there's a bit of a joke.
Can I add something on LDS?
Yes,
real
yeah.
quick? One of my favorite pieces in the barn is actually One-Eyed Blind. And I would like you to kind of pull him up in the barn just because it's a good stats versus preferences ideal, because this horse wasn't specifically great on the track, but when I look at the breeding reports, even just speed and stamina outliers were my most. So it's even got me questioning, man, should I try to take Kate over there, because it just matches to a T perfect with her, and it actually gets the stamina out just a tick further than even Doc does. And so with this horse specifically, it's a unique horse, and you'll see it had low preferences, but it had some real outlier stats, and it makes for what I consider a really strong breed. Obviously, it's got a price as such. But to me, like LDS to compete, in the Derby, I think this horse is probably going to produce as many, if not any. Obviously, everything depends on the quality of the mare as well.
Yeah, I think it's a case where it's basically the only LDS that has stamina. And now the other LDSs have better finish than he does, but not having stamina. I mean, the Scuba ones have stamina. We talked about that earlier. So an example of Scuba would be Loggerhead, which is still racing out of ISM. Rocket Cashal, which is Balthazar, I think that's still racing as well. So of the archetypes that still have to retire, there's going to be some eyes on, and no pun intended on One-Eyed Blind, but some eyes on what the reveals are for Elvis, Rocket Cashal, and Loggerhead for sure.
And I've already got a 1-year-old through OEB with a unique LDS S- girl. It's just a 1.5 to 1.5. So in about 4 weeks here, we'll be able to test the whole stats versus preferences thing. I mean, obviously we're testing it now, but I think specific little cases like that are always something to keep an eye on.
For sure. The last 2 archetypes, LTS and LTF, could be a bug, could be a feature. LTF didn't exist at the Gen 0 level, so any LTS horses that are in existence now were bred. People spearheading that challenger, Soulmates, and OEB. He's got Persian Bold, which is the S-, LDF Colt, which profiles pretty well to try to get to LTF. So in the absence of having LTF, again, we talk about how these archetypes prefer certain distance preferences, whether that was sprinting for LDF or longer distance for RTS. LTS prefers longer distance as well. Basically everything there, the 1 of 1s that exist there are 9925, which is the jockey or at the track one, 9924, which is the ticket window one, and then 9923, which is Scuba. All of those predominantly prefer to run longer distances. So even though LTF didn't exist in the sprints that were LTF and LTS, we were seeing the dominant sprinting of LDF horses win there. So the challenge is not only creating LTF that doesn't exist, the challenges are going to be to create sprinters that are either LTF or LTS, because like I said, there's really not any in the LTS either. Watch my horse, Goat's Head Soup, lose this race. Fading. Was probably the best marathoner at RTF. It's sad. I hope it's aging.
All right, Stins. I just want to say I appreciate you. I appreciate you holding this for people. This is about as thorough, in-depth guide as you can get. I'm going to roll out and get some lunch. I just appreciate you having me on here, and thanks whoever's listening out there. I hope you get at least some value from it. Appreciate you, DJ.
Later, man.
See ya. Oh man, I even got beat by a horse that bred with Jupiter that wasn't my own. Sad, sad, sad.
What was that?
Like 8, but I don't know where to run that horse. I'm just hoping it ages or peak
Yeah, I
ages
think
later.
there's going to be some deals on the marketplace for people that get kind of like distraught by not winning early and are going to end up just being really good horses. I don't know. Or you could just sell me that horse now if you're one of those people. Whatever you want to do.
No, I feel comfortable holding it. I mean, the team had said that aging was off in Gen 0 horses, and I think a lot of the community would maybe concede that maybe by definition it was off, but there was still an impact made based on even aging being off that was associated with aging. And in that sense, I thought Jupiter, which is our S Colt, was definitely a late
He sucked
peaker.
as a 2-year-old, right? Not
Yeah,
sucked,
yeah.
but he did better at older. Yeah. I mean, I'm not worried about it. If my horses aren't winning right now, I think they will. And if they are winning now, I fully expect them not to win next week or whatever. So we'll figure it out.
Quickly, I'll wrap here in 5. The only other subjects we had were listener questions. Ask them in this chat. We probably won't get to many today, but it'll maybe give me ideas for future shows. Ask them in the PFL Discord. Hit us up on Twitter if you've got questions. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but just wanted to highlight some big deals. And I know Tom's here. Again, I mentioned this yesterday. It's my hope to the team that we get back to being able to scroll 7 full days. I feel like it wasn't letting me the other day when I was trying to do this. Yeah, it
Does
only
Gap
lets you go.
track it all now, though?
Does it? I do not know.
I don't know. I thought they said they were working on it. I don't go on Gap enough. I really should.
Okay.
Takes me
Well,
too long
I
to
mean,
get horses.
yeah, I'll just shout out that Blue Elder, which is Tom, corrected me in the chat that they've made 4 instead of I think 2 is what I suggested. Nate LFC had made 2 himself and sold 1 to Tom. I think GVG's acquired a couple, so we're seeing several deals that are in the 10K USDC price range, which is really exciting, and it's been a variety of buyers. Most of the buyers are people that have been here for a while, but we're seeing new people come in and buy things for $5,000 or higher as well. So it's exciting times. Hopefully we can keep the momentum up. Hopefully Crown makes it a very welcoming racing environment for people to gamble a little bit. And then to that end, I mean, ultimately the goal needs to be to get people to make picks or gamble on the race itself. So gambling or picks haven't been covered. We didn't cover it today. We didn't cover it yesterday. We can maybe do a separate show on that. Maybe we can do it with Doughboy, who's an aficionado of picking horses. But that's the long-term sustainability model, is how do we get a betting handle on these races that is sufficient to cover a large portion of the entry fee of the horses. So still a long way to go. Been a lot of exciting progress made in the last month, though. So any final thoughts from you?
No, I think mainly it's just we'll see how these foals happen. I mean, it was a lot easier to have this chat 3 months ago when we were racing tickets and we kind of realized the tickets were what they were. A lot of those same principles still apply, but a lot of them are different now with the preferences that we hit on pretty hard. You used to know exactly what type of horse you had if it had 9 preferences. Now you could have a 9 preference horse that's weaker, things like that. So that's what I'm watching the most, is kind of that blend between grade, preferences, all that. Like I said, if you have a filly, I think you want them. If you have a colt and you're going to race it, maybe they're not as important. But yeah, watching that and then aging. Yeah, there you go. Market report is out on Gap. So that's good. That way you can export it and maybe keep track.
Fair enough. So, all right. Well, I appreciate everybody joining in. Again, as always, this replay will be available on our YouTube channel and it'll stay on Twitch until we stream again. No next stream in mind at this time, with 2 straight days of streaming. So I'll probably take a little bit of a break from it, but maybe some big activity will happen and we'll fire up a stream again. So appreciate all the people that joined. Appreciate you, JJ, for sticking around the entire time. Appreciate the chat. We will see you guys later.